Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Hello, Neo.
Who are you?
I am the architect. I created the Matrix.
Just how deep does the matrix of the programming of the general public go? Would it surprise you to discover just how subtle and obvious the programming truly is? Back in 2011, InfoWars spoke with Cuban-born journalist Alex Abella about the RAND Corporation's infiltration of the American psyche.
What RAND actually did during the 1950s is that they came up with this particular way of looking at the world that changed everything, that changed the world we live in, that changed how we think, how we talk, the schools we send our kids to, how we pay our taxes, the planes we fly in. They've changed the whole world. They developed something called rational choice theory that after it came up and after it was developed and expanded, it turned us from citizens into consumers. And instead of having rights and responsibilities, we became consumers with choices in a world where what really counts is what they call the consumer sovereignty, or the sovereignty of the consumer, where what counts is not what we do or who we believe in or what God we pray to, but how much money we're going to spend and what's in it for me.
Choice. The problem is choice.
The rational choice theory has gradually been inundated in American culture for at the very least 5 generations.
The Matrix is older than you know. I prefer counting from the emergence of one integral anomaly to the emergence of the next, in which case this is the 6th version.
The RAND Corporation is at the heart of the New World Order. It's part of that inner coterie, or almost a group of ring wraith organizations that serve this dark system. And the RAND Corporation, literally, if you research the white papers they put out that are public, has set the policy that we are now living under in this country, and they have the nerve to locate themselves, give a street named 1776.
Simply put, it's far easier to control a nation of mindless consumers than free-thinking individuals with strong beliefs. Globalist think tanks, the RAND Corporation, the CFR, hand in hand with the CIA and the Pentagon, have developed and customized unyielding psyops on the American people, bringing us to the state of dysfunction we all experience today. After leaving the Washington Post in 1977, Carl Bernstein wrote for Rolling Stone. In 1953, Joseph Alsop, then one of America's leading syndicated columnists, went to the Philippines to cover an election. He did not go because he was asked to do so by his syndicate. He did not go because he was asked to do so by the newspapers that printed his column. He went at the request of the CIA. Alsop is one of more than 400 American journalists who in the past 25 years have secretly carried out assignments for the Central Intelligence Agency, according to documents on file at CIA headquarters. Fast forward to the present day, and those same meddling internal forces have grown a mutated psyop into monstrous proportions in the form of Black Lives Matter. The Washington Times recently revealed that the Ford Foundation and Borealis Philanthropy recently announced the formation of the Black-Led Movement Fund, BLMF, a 6-year pooled donor campaign aimed at raising $100 million for the Movement for Black Lives Coalition. That funding comes in addition to more than $33 million in grants to the Black Lives Matter movement from top Democratic Party donor George Soros through his Open Society foundations, as well as grant making from the Center for American Progress.
Well, yes. I mean, there has been always a link between think tanks and the big powerful economic interests. Specifically, in the case of RAND, there has been a link between RAND and the Ford Foundation.
The Ford Foundation has been providing cover as a CIA funding arm since the Cold War, and Borealis Philanthropy has been expanding funding to bring in an invasion of illegal immigrants into the United States, raising over $90 million in 8 years. America is being eaten away from the inside out, and it's getting easier and easier as more and more Americans isolate themselves from their fellow citizens and their inherited responsibility to be mindful of the overwhelming evidence that we are being smothered under a blanket of globalism. John Bound for Infowars.com. What has President Obama done with 2 terms as our commander-in-chief? Fixed the economy? Nope. The national debt went from $10.6 trillion to $19.5 trillion under his watch. And Obama is the only president in history to not see a 3% increase in the GDP. Healed division as the first black president? Nope. America is sitting on a powder keg of anarchy as a result of the Alinskyite methods unleashed by the White House and its lapdog media and the hordes of communists and faux civil rights movements under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter attacking their own communities. Kept America safe? Oh no. The United States just surpassed Europe in the admittance of Muslim refugees, 21% of which that will stop at nothing to foment jihad in our communities. As Orlando, San Bernardino, and 9/11 cast a dark shadow over national security, and Europe's example serves as a harsh warning for the very near future. Is it getting clearer? President Obama's achievements don't involve you, the average U.S. citizen, be you on the left or the right or in the middle. His achievements are applauded by foreign bankers and oligarchs whose agenda reads like an instruction manual of the legacy of our 44th President of the United States. Obama came up big on one of his promises. He managed to bankrupt the coal industry, a huge boon to the natural gas industry, fracking its way across America.
As oil and gas production has doubled over the past 5 years, the number of earthquakes rattling Oklahoma has surged. Until 2008, the state averaged 1 to 2 quakes magnitude 3 or greater per year. In 2015, it's averaged 2 per day.
The coal industry has been devastated by nearly 30% since Obama took office. The Daily Caller reports coal use fell in every state but Nebraska and Alaska, devastating both the coal power and the coal mining industries, and even forcing Peabody Energy, the world's largest coal company, to declare bankruptcy. Jobs hemorrhaged under the hugely unpopular corporocratic Congress Obama presided over. China has been devastating our manufacturing base since 2001. 15 years later, nothing has been done to counter it. In fact, everything has been done to open the gaping wound. John Rappaport of No More Fake News writes, Obama is the Rockefeller globalist man in the White House. He's tasked with pushing through congressional ratification of the TPP come hell or high water. First, know that the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is a huge globalist trade deal among 12 nations that would phase out thousands of tariffs and set up corporate tribunals to punish nations that refuse to import goods, e.g. toxic pesticides, toxic medical drugs, GMOs, etc. In short, it's a nightmare. Wiping out tariffs is the cornerstone of the globalist agenda. It allows companies in industrial countries to move their factories to third world hellholes, pay slave wages, ignore environmental conditions, and then export their products back to the countries they abandoned with no tariffs, no taxes, no penalties. Meanwhile, White House mouthpiece Politico nonchalantly reports President Barack Obama is taking the fight for the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal to America's streets. The White House is making an all-out push to win passage of the deal in the lame duck session of Congress, organizing 30 events over the congressional recess to gin up support for the agreement. If that isn't brainwashing, I don't know what is. Simultaneously, Obama's Department of Commerce is handing over the reins of the internet in October to a multinational authority that includes China, Russia, and Iran as an olive branch of Obama's failed foreign policy after the NSA had been discovered spying on world leaders, which more than likely was the ploy all along. Globalism is here, ladies and gentlemen. Your very existence and that of your descendants is at stake as Obama sets up to throw a Hail Mary of treason in the final minutes of his New World Order presidency. John Bound for Infowars.com.
We're in the middle of the longest streak of private sector job creation in history. More than 14 million new jobs. The strongest 2 years of job growth since the 1990s.
Graphs show it's all
an unemployment rate cut in half.
Here's what Obama's not telling you. Not only are 17% of U.S. jobs now held by immigrant workers, but the average U.S. stock is already down over 20% this year. And the global economy is flirting with severe recession. In fact, the Royal Bank of Scotland even warned its clients to sell everything and exit the stock market as soon as possible. Even Obama's controller, George Soros, says the sky is falling. Perhaps what better reason than this to tell the American people it isn't. Obama's claim that 900,000 manufacturing jobs were created in his past 6 years twisted the fact that manufacturing jobs have actually diminished by 230,000. Obama claimed he cut the unemployment rate in half. He is measuring the fudged 5% unemployment rate by the dismal 10% unemployment rate he was responsible for in October of 2009. As more jobs go overseas and the labor arena shrinks back here at home and baby boomers retire, nearly 95 million Americans are not in the workforce. 35.4% of the country is on welfare, 38.8% of which are white and 39.8% which are black, while 62% of working Americans have less than $1,000 in savings.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976 they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
On the verge of entering the darkest economic period in our nation's history.
We're talking about a prolonged depression. We're talking about massive deflation, massive unemployment, rampant bank collapses, a 70% best case scenario stock market drop. This could all start within the next 6 months.
Recently, all 16 branches of our intelligence community have come together to release a shocking briefing that contained an alarming consensus. These agencies, that include the CIA, FBI, Army, and Navy, they've already begun to estimate the impact of the fall of the dollar as the global reserve currency, and our reign as the world's leading superpower being annihilated in a way equivalent to the end of the British Empire post-World War II. And the endgame could be a nightmarish scenario where the world falls into an extended period of global anarchy.
There's now concern in different branches of the U.S. government. Historically in Washington, the Treasury and the Fed take care of the dollar, the Pentagon and the intelligence community take care of other threats. But what happens when the dollar is the threat? Americans generally know that the Fed has increased the money supply by $3.1 trillion. We have $17.5 trillion of debt. We have $127 trillion of unfunded liabilities. What are those? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, student loans, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA. You go through the whole list and it goes on and on and on. There's no way to pay it. During the boom years of the 1950s and 1960s, every dollar of debt that was created, we got $2.41 worth of economic growth. So that was pretty good bang for the buck. But by the stagflation of the late 1970s, that had actually collapsed. So now for a dollar of debt in the late 1970s, we were only getting 41 cents of growth. So obviously that's a huge drop off. You know what that number is today? Today we only get 3 cents of growth for every dollar of debt. So we're piling on the debt, but we're getting less and less growth as that trend goes from $2.41 to 41 cents to 3 cents. It's soon going to go negative. This is a signal of a complex system about to collapse.
When you look at the stock market, the only market actually rising, the only chart that actually shows continued rise is the stock market. Yet we're seeing volumes drop. A lot of people are not in the stock market, but the few that are there, they're taking out massive margin debt because, let's face it, are they chasing income? Are they trying to speculate to bring income in? Some of the fixed income people. You've been watching margin debt. What's been going on recently with the margin debt on buying stock?
Your major moves higher in margin debt were an indication of sort of the last gasp of speculation in the stock market.
It's always a sign of a crash coming.
Sure. 2000, the spike in margin debt preceded the decline in 2001. The spike in margin debt in 2007 preceded the decline in 2008 in equities. And 2014 is going to reach the history books and be one of those same periods. I think 2014 is an up year for the equity market, and it's either 2015 or 2016 where we see an absolute catastrophe in the U.S. stock markets. June's numbers were in. We got those at the end of last week, and the June numbers were released. It jumped $25 billion in a single month.
So the margin debt is up $25 billion in 1 month.
That's right, and it's $1 billion off the all-time record number in nominal terms. And then if you wanted to say, well, nominal terms, things change with inflation. You've got to have some sort of a way of calculating it. It doesn't just look at nominal values. Well, as a percentage of stock market capitalization, it is at its highest level ever. And that would be 1929, and that would even be the 1999 to 2000 period. As a percentage of stock market capitalization, the speculative money, that is, money borrowed from the bank to speculate in stocks, is at an all-time record high.
Jim, are you seeing any signs that our stock market has reached a supercritical state?
Well, unfortunately, yes, we're seeing a lot of signs of this. One of the ones that's really fundamental and really important is the ratio of stock market capitalization to GDP. Because remember, the value of all the stocks in the stock market, that's supposed to represent the fundamental economy. It's not supposed to be off in a world of its own. But if you look at what's been happening to that ratio recently, it's going sky high. It's 203%. Prior to the recession, that number was 183%. Go back to the famous tech bubble, the dot-com implosion of 2000. At that time, it was 204%. And if you want the scariest news of all, just prior to the Great Depression, that number was 87%. In other words, the stock market capitalization as a percentage of GDP is twice as high as it was just prior to the Great Depression. So that's a really good metric for saying, hey, is the stock market heading for a crash? All the data says, yes, we are. But there's another metric, another warning sign, if you will, that's even more frightening, which is the gross notional value of derivatives. There's a certain number of shares of IBM that are outstanding, but we know what that number is. But there's no limit on the derivatives. I can write options and futures on IBM stock all day long and all the other stocks on the stock market. And that's what's been going on. Now, the gross notional value of derivatives in the world today is over $700 trillion, not billion, 700 trillion. That's 10 times global GDP. This collapse is unavoidable. So, we ask ourselves, how bad can this be? Well, what happened in 2007, 2008 when the markets collapsed? We all remember the value of stocks going down, real estate going down, housing going down. All that lost wealth was $60 trillion. The problem is now the system is bigger, so I would expect the lost wealth this time to be $100 trillion, possibly a lot more. We're in this critical state, getting close to the supercritical state where the system implodes. But it takes a catalyst, it takes a flashpoint. There are a number of potential flashpoints. The unemployment rate today is actually 23% when you calculate it the right way.
And you point the finger right at the Fed, Congress, the White House.
I actually was in a meeting in the Treasury, and I said to the audience, the Fed and the Treasury are the greatest threat to national security, not Al-Qaeda, not some of the other threats out there, but right here in this building with this group, you people are destroying the dollar, and it's just a matter of time before it collapses. But by money printing and credit creation and reckless monetary policy by the Fed, we're making the San Andreas Fault bigger every day. And when you make a complex system bigger, the risk doesn't go up a little bit, it goes up exponentially. So the risk is unimaginable at this time. The collapse hasn't happened yet, but the forces are building up, and that's just about to snap. Think of it as an airplane that's coming in for a nosedive. It's crashing, getting close to the ground. The Fed's trying to grab the joystick and pull the plane up out of the nosedive and get it back in the air, but unfortunately, it's not working. We're heading for a crash. There's about $60 trillion of debt on the balance sheets of our banking system. For a long time, debt in the banks grew at about 2 times the rate of growth in the economy, but lately this has exploded. Today, it's up to 30 to 1. In other words, for every dollar of economic growth, there's $30 of credit being created by the banking system. The whole thing's unstable. What happens as the depression worsens? Businesses can't pay their debts, the bad losses fall on the banks ultimately fail. That's happened before. The Fed's there to bail out the banks. What happens when the Fed itself is in jeopardy?
Regardless of which flashpoint unleashes the 25-year Great Depression, folks need to understand it's coming, and coming quick.
I just find it absolutely amazing that we now see CNN and other outlets coming out and saying, Hillary doesn't want to control the guns. We didn't have anything to do with the creation of ISIS, the training or equipping of ISIS. At the same time that the New York Times, this is going back to August 6th, so this is less than a week ago. New York Times said, military success in Syria gives Putin the upper hand in the U.S. proxy war. Okay, I just reported on this at the beginning of the week on the nightly news. They're calling it a proxy war. They're saying Russia is beating America in Syria in a proxy war. Okay, so who's on the two sides? Who are the players? Who's our proxy? Well, on the Russian side, the proxy is Syria and Assad, okay? Who is on our side? The New York Times says it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS, al-Nusra, the rebels. Let me read you a little bit of this. The Syrian military, they said, was floundering last year. The rebel offensive was aided by powerful tank-destroying missiles supplied by the CIA and Saudi Arabia. But then the Russians arrived, and they bludgeoned CIA-backed rebel forces for the first time since Afghanistan in the 1980s. Okay, and that would be, as Alex just pointed out, what Zbigniew Brzezinski and Jimmy Carter, his assistant, Jimmy Carter, created with the Mujahideen to go after the Russians in Afghanistan. And then we continued that under Reagan because, the foreign policy of the elites at the top, the globalist warmongers, are the same, whether it's Republican or Democrat. It really doesn't matter. That's why they hate Donald Trump so much. And that's why you've got these 50 globalist spooks signing a letter saying that Donald Trump isn't fit to be president, okay? Why? Because he is openly saying the stuff that they don't want you to know. He's exposing their lies, their corruption, their chaos. They're being on both sides of most conflicts, but especially being on the side of the terrorists and telling us that they're going to protect us from the terrorists, both abroad and domestically. They create the threat, and then they have their solution, which is more government, more military, more police, more force directed at us, not at them. Okay, they're telling you that they're fighting ISIS. They're not fighting ISIS. The New York Times is telling you at the same time, this is a proxy war that we're losing, and the people on our side are ISIS. They go on to say, We've now, for the first time since the 1980s, the Russian military for the past year has been in direct combat with rebel forces trained and supplied by the CIA. Okay, that's that conspiracy theory website, the New York Times, that liberals think is the paper of record. If you think that is the paper of record, then listen to them, because they have recorded what's going on, and they'll tell you on a Saturday or whatever what's going on, but then throughout the week they pretend it doesn't exist, just like CNN wants to pretend that Hillary Clinton has never said anything about taking your guns, okay? Okay, CNN says that you've got various, you got the Washington Post writing an op-ed post saying, Hillary Clinton's not for gun control, get serious. Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about that in a moment, too. They go on to say, even quoting a guy from the Woodrow Wilson Center, Russia has won the proxy war, at least for now, said Michael Kaufman, a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. Woodrow Wilson, another globalist, okay? And as we pointed out and we talked about it at the time, where did all this start, okay? Libya is the arms bazaar for chaos, especially for ISIS, for all these terrorists. That's where they're getting their weapons. That's where this all began. Why did that happen? Why do we have to overthrow the Syrian government? Why did we have to overthrow Libya? Well, we know now, because WikiLeaks gave us Hillary Clinton's emails. We could see the emails back in 2011 between her and Sidney Blumenthal, okay, talking about why it was necessary to take out Gaddafi. Now, they've got a lot of oil, have a lot of water there, massive, massive freshwater underground supply there, but that wasn't really the core thing that they were after. It always goes back to the bankers, doesn't it? In every war, it goes back to the bankers. And they said, these sanctions aren't really going to work because Gaddafi has been stockpiling gold and silver. He's got about 143 tons of each because he was going to back his currency with gold. You know, the French, he wanted to go in competition with the French franc, with the American dollar, with the petrodollar that we created with the Saudi Arabians. They said he wants to establish a pan-African currency based on the Libyan dinar backed with gold. The plan was designed to provide the African countries, the Francophone African countries, the ones that had been under the dominance of the colonial powers. And you have to understand, they are still colonial powers. They're just trying to mask it, and they're trying to create chaos on both sides. They don't want competition with their fiat currencies. That's why they started this all. We'll be right back.
Another closing message, but I feel compelled to say what I'm about to say. Now, I risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government.
Executive order signed by President Obama has sparked controversy on both sides of the political aisle. The National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order was signed quietly Friday night. It gives the president the power to control U.S. resources.
The Rules Committee is going to meet in the House. They are going to come up with a rule that makes it okay for them to do a same-day bill. So they'll pass this rule. It's, believe it or not, called martial law.
This would give the President of the United States the authority to declare basically martial law during times of peace.
There are new disturbing developments out of Washington tonight regarding the President's belief that he has the legal authority to assassinate U.S. citizens. Incredibly enough, it appears that our commander-in-chief actually believes that authority exists not only on foreign soil, but right here on American soil as well.
But Senators McCain and Levin have added this legislation, which would authorize the president to declare the entire United States of America, all 50 states and all territories, to be a battlefield, even though there's no battle, thanks be to God, going on here.
War on terror is different.
And that would authorize him to use commander-in-chief authority in the United States, to use the military to arrest people in the United States who, in the president's opinion, are enemies of the country.
Particularly to hear President Obama claim the power to keep people in prison indefinitely with no charges against them, no conviction, no sentence, just imprisonment.
Joining us now is former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino. Dan, thanks a lot for joining us. What do you mean there's no such thing as gun control, only people control? Tell me what that means.
Tucker, this is larger ideological ploy by this administration. They're not being authentic with America, whether it's the sequester, healthcare, or the gun control issue. What they do is they manipulate an emotional crisis, a national emotional crisis, to further an ideological agenda which involves the evaporation, the slow disintegration of your civil rights, your liberties, your ability to live and let live. And it's a disturbing pattern that, frankly, is really starting to get under my skin.
The US is funneling money into tracking systems that are threatening to make the very concept of privacy a thing of the past. It could mean people's every move being used against them to keep them under surveillance.
The information age was an era nearly everybody embraced. But today's surveillance age, experts say, is a reality almost no one can escape.
David, why does the DHS need 450 million hollow point bullets?
That kind of ammo that they purchased from ATK, hollow point ammunition, as you had explained, it's designed to, tear through human flesh and then expand. It's designed to kill people. This is not the optimal kind of ammo you would buy for target practice. It's more expensive and it's more precise.
Do you think this is a sign that they're preparing for some sort of mass civil unrest?
So they have an open bid right now, DHS, for even more ammunition, for 175 million rounds of .223 caliber rifle ammo. It's almost identical to the ammunition used by NATO peacekeeping forces. So that's very interesting. Are they planning on some kind of widespread economic unrest in the U.S. that would require NATO forces to help us out?
$500 million in surplus military weaponry from the Pentagon, which is authorized through the Pentagon's 1033 program. During the late 70s, Congress passed legislation called Posse Comitatus, barring the military from operating on American soil. And in the early 80s, there was an effort to circumvent that in Congress by arming police with military-grade weaponry. And now we're seeing that play out in the streets. People in the inner city in the U.S. have been experiencing this. So civilians in the U.S. are now up against basically military-style policing.
The battle against terrorism involves all of us. Everybody in this country is a potential terrorist.
The Department of Homeland Security sent to law enforcement agencies across the country warning about the potential for an increase in right-wing extremist activity. It warns about groups and individuals dedicated to single issues like abortion, immigration, and gun rights.
Tonight, our focus is on every American's right to freedom of expression and freedom of religion. It's the Christians who are under siege by government officials and anti-religion groups who think Christmas and Christianity have no business in the public arena.
The Department of Defense has just issued a new list of extremists that should be watched. And on that, in fact, number one, past the Muslim Brotherhood and past Hamas, Hezbollah, number one, evangelical Christians.
We begin tonight with a newly leaked U.S. Army military police training manual for what they are calling civil disturbance operations. The Army manual outlines the plan to kill rioters and demonstrators in America. That's right, they have plans to confiscate our firearms and kill American citizens on U.S. soil. This during a mass civil unrest, I guess, shooting innocent civilians perhaps. And it goes on to describe how prisoners will be processed through internment camps. Wow. So there you have it. Our own military being trained for armed conflict with U.S. citizens. They're being trained to confiscate our guns in preparations to process us into camps during civil unrest.
A pretty scary scene along the Chicago River turns out to be a military training exercise.
There was nothing routine that folks reported about seeing the jarring, as they witnessed the jarring scene of at least 3 Black Hawk helicopters flying at times in close order formation.
Just in, a military drill in downtown Miami, complete with these Black Hawk helicopters, elite soldiers, and police officers swarming the street.
Take a look, swing back over here. This may be involved in this training or not. Again, let me tell you what all of this is that we know of. It's a joint military training exercise involving local police, also military.
Sight of Army helicopters and the sound of gunfire created a lot of concern this afternoon in one Houston neighborhood.
There were armed men in fatigues, plenty of weapons, and what many thought were real live rounds.
I told you they were coming. There's no lights on them. They're like bugs.
So here's the article by Steve Watson. Military helicopters conduct covert exercises over U.S. bank buildings. This is all part of other drills going on to acclimate the public to being attacked by our own military that are happening here in the United States. Here it is.
LAPD and elite military units conducted extraordinary counterterrorism training in the skies above downtown LA tonight.
At one point, they made what appeared to be a drop-off at a park. Within seconds of landing, the helicopter was back in the air.
It was a strange sight in the skies over Los Angeles. Military Special Forces flying a practice mission last night, and there are more exercises scheduled for today. The entire city of Boston is in lockdown. In the suburb of Watertown, police with guns drawn are searching door to door.
I mean, we had martial law up there. FBI and all these agents coming in, closing things down, going to people's houses.
Mr. President, I do want to get right to the news of this week.
Sure.
The terrorism in Boston.
Yeah.
Many people have wondered if it took you right back to 9/11 when you heard it.
Well, at first, I was deeply concerned that there might have been a organized plot. I don't know all the facts. I don't think we all know all the facts, but I was deeply concerned that this could have been, another.
The United States government's plan to murder over 120 million citizens. We do not have enough time to reveal all of the evidence or history on this plot. You must find the truth out for yourself. Open your eyes. People are already disappearing in the USA. The homeless are being rounded up in the night by military persons and disposed of. Mass graves are already in place, as well as millions of coffins that President Obama has bought himself for the citizens of the US. Each crematorium-ready coffin can fit 5 bodies easily. The citizens of America have already been divided into groups based on data gathered on them by census records. NSA spying and labeled by markers on their mailboxes. There are 3 groups: the dead group, the re-education group, and the compliance group. The citizens labeled for the dead group are going to be rounded up beginning in mid-July and taken to one of over 800 FEMA camps in the U.S., each prepared to exterminate and dispose of over 220,000 people at one time. These camps have been built over many years and are equipped, guarded and functioning as we speak. The citizens labeled to be re-educated will be sent to the camps to be brainwashed, re-educated, until the government deems them fit for circulation back into society. Lastly, the compliance group are those who the government does not see as a threat but as those able to be bribed or simply weak enough to comply with anything the government demands. Already, in the U.S., soldiers from all branches of military are set up and actively running night raids in civilian homes, and more are coming daily. Law enforcement is set up to work with them. New military vehicles and equipment are being injected into the society every day. Obama states the purpose of this is for a drill that will help train military for combat situations and to get the public used to interacting with them. The United States of secrecy has kept you all blind, just like the U.S. citizens are kept blind. Bills have been passed secretly, without going through Congress, without being seen or approved by anyone but the president alone. Bills that make martial law easily available, indefinite detention and torture of any citizen without hearing or trial legal, as well as the assassination of any U.S. citizen without need for explanation unrestricted by dictator Obama. The United States has been a police state for many years now, but it is coming to a head. Obama is planning on implementing martial law so he can further control the population, murder citizens, stay in power and eventually bring about a new world order. Already Russia, China, and countries in Europe are in alliance with the U.S. on this and plan to aid in creating one world government. We are not here today to discuss this but to help save the people. If you think the American Holocaust will not affect you, you are sadly mistaken. This is going to spread. This is already taking place. People are already being murdered. The United States citizens need your help to save the country and their lives.
Use a natural disaster to claim a 3rd term as president. Recently, there has been a lot of talk about an imminent disaster that could happen. 2 months ago, it was Yellowstone. And just after that, everybody was worried about Mount St. Helens. And then the big news was the epic hurricane season that we would see this summer. And now, all the attention is focused on the Cascadia subduction zone and the threat of a 9.0 earthquake that could affect millions of people along the West Coast. It's as though the government is cluing us in that a huge natural disaster is going to happen at any moment, and it could be anything, and we should be prepared. Why are they doing this? Obama and FEMA officials have spoken out now on several occasions. People need to be ready for a cataclysm, that they should have stored food, water, and other supplies and have an escape route. Obama isn't the only leader talking about an imminent event. The Canadian government is also making preparations for a disaster. British Columbia has spent millions of dollars in readiness for a massive earthquake and tsunami. British Columbia's emergency preparedness minister says it's not a matter of whether an earthquake will hit the West Coast or not. It's a matter of when it will hit. Students in Alberta were told last month that they should be prepared for a climate disaster. A somewhat unusual warning to a region located closer to the center of Canada's mainland, not near a body of water. Looking at the U.S.'s West Coast, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee has recently started preparing emergency services in his state. He cites that it's not a matter of if, but when, for the Cascadian earthquake to happen. California has already made preparations in April and May and is participating in a major drill taking place from June 7th through the 10th called Cascadia Rising. This involves the states of Washington, Oregon, and California and is backed by FEMA. It simulates a 9.0 earthquake and the potential for a tsunami. Oregon Governor Kate Brown and California Governor Jerry Brown have both invested heavily in earthquake disaster response and preparation. They've been vocal about the need to prepare for a huge coming earthquake and how one can stay safe during such an event. Additionally, several mainstream media publications have pushed people in the US and Canada to prepare now for a climate devastation.
It's not a matter of if, but when for us. And today, thousands of first responders held a massive drill to make sure that they know what to do when that big one strikes.
9.0 magnitude earthquake and tsunami hits. In fact, the Oregon Office of Emergency Management says it'll affect more than 15 million people in our area. 5,000 of them will die, and more than 1 million of them will be in need of food, an issue Governor Kate Brown addressed this morning.
And their homes should be stocked with food, water, and critical items to help them sustain extended periods of time without electricity or plumbing.
Total chaos that can happen at any moment.
Why are they doing this? Why do they keep issuing these warnings about imminent climate threats? We've also seen companies in Canada and the US who are now pouring millions of dollars into disaster response, including AT&T, who will invest $600 million so that customers can maintain communication during a disaster. Additionally, there are several other states located in the center of the U.S. that will carry out major disaster response exercises, including Tennessee. According to the article you see on the screen, Tennessee will carry out one of the largest exercises in the history of the state. Is it just me, or does it seem like there's a lot of preparation for a climate cataclysm that is coming, whatever it might be, whether it's Cascadia or a hurricane or something else? Is something going to come this summer, before the election? And if so, could this result in a cancellation by Barack Obama? The answer is yes. In fact, Obama can do it easily with the declaration of martial law. Constitutional rights in America will be suspended in such an instance. It is hard for people in the U.S. to envision what their nation would look like under martial law. Some say it can't be done, but I beg to differ. In fact, I will play a clip of a congressional hearing from decades ago, where a discussion ensued about the suspension of the Constitution and the establishment of a provisional government during a time of national crisis. A crisis does not have to be a military invasion. It could be a natural disaster that leads to the outbreak of chaos. In this event, Obama could easily lay aside all amendments of the Constitution, including the 22nd, that forces term limits on the executive branch.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was.
May I most respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, I'm certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
And tragically, the only member who got close was Jack Brooks, and he was stopped by the chairman. But the truth of the matter is that, yes, you do have those standby provisions, and the plans are there, and the statutory emergency plans are there, whereby you could, in the name of stopping terrorism, apprehend, invoke the military, and arrest Americans and hold them in detention camps.
This clip clearly shows that a top-secret plan has been in place for some time that pertains to the suspension of the U.S. Constitution and the ushering in of a provisional government during a national crisis. For the naysayers, here is a congressman who was told to shut up when he questioned that such a plan was already in place. If Obama isn't going to declare martial law and establish a provisional government at some point from now until January 19, 2017, then why did Mitch McConnell fast-track a bill back in January that handed Obama absolute authority of the U.S. military to declare martial law anywhere in the world, including the United States? That's correct. Never before in history has a president of the U.S. had such power over the military to declare martial law for any reason, at any point in time, anywhere in the world. Martial law changes everything, even constitutional rights. You no longer have them. They're gone, including the 22nd Amendment, which limits Obama to 2 terms. He no longer would be forced to leave office if martial law was declared. Several individuals have spoken out publicly about the potential for an Obama 3rd term with the eruption of a major calamity in the United States. Dr. Ben Carson warned that Obama could cancel the election under widespread anarchy, while former Congressman Allen West declared that Obama was taking several actions to ensure that he will have a 3rd term. Larry Nichols has spoken out about Obama's plot to keep power using a FEMA provisional government, and Democratic Senator Chris Murphy warned on the floor of the Senate back in January that Mitch McConnell's bill was handing martial authority to Barack Obama.
Is working. Madam President, today I wanted to come down to the floor to speak very briefly about a resolution that the Majority Leader introduced, I believe, earlier today. This is an authorization for military force resolution that apparently purports to give the President legal authority to conduct military operations against ISIS. Before we break for the weekend, Madam President, I thought it was important to come to the floor to explain why, very briefly, to my colleagues, to explain what this resolution really is. This resolution is a total rewrite of the War Powers Clause of the United States Constitution. Let's be clear about that. It is essentially a declaration of international martial law, a sweeping transfer of military power to the President that will allow him or her to send U.S. troops almost anywhere in the world for almost any reason with absolutely no limitations.
Everything's been put in place. The stage has been set. All that's needed now is a widespread calamity or catastrophe, and then troops can be ushered in, and the martial declaration can be made in the United States. An Obama 3rd term scenario is really not hard to accomplish. If the Cascadia subduction zone were to blow, or any other type of natural disaster, such an event could easily cause enough chaos, looting, and rioting for Obama to declare the martial state. Once he does this, the 22nd Amendment goes up in smoke, and his 3rd term is ushered in.